Good evening. And I always start with thanking God for the wonderful opportunity to, in this case, be back again in Calgary. I also would like to say that I am happy that we've all arrived here safely, and I hope and pray that our returns back to our destinations or our homes will be equally as safe. Thank you so much, Leslie Donahue, for that very warm introduction. This evening is a very special evening for me personally, and I want to express gratitude for all the warmth that I have received in a nearly cold climate. It's not really cold for you guys, but it's cold for me coming from Atlanta. Or it's getting cold, I should say. It's really not cold, but it's getting there. That's why I'm leaving early in the morning before the real cold gets here. Let me say to all of the different chairs, of course, Leslie is an honorary chair, I believe, and the gala chair, to the board chair and the entire board of the YWCA, certainly to the CEO, Sue Tumney, who I sat next to and had a very wonderful amount of conversation this evening. I want to express my special appreciation to the YWCA of Calgary and all of those business sponsors that David Kelly so incredibly memorized. That was impressive. I mean, hasn't he done a great job this evening? Yeah. Not only for inviting me to be your speaker on this occasion, but I also want to thank you for all the great work that the YWCA has been doing for women, girls, and all people in your community for more than a century. My mother, Coretta Scott King, taught me from an early age to respect and support women in their quest for equal rights. Like many women who've lost their husbands and partners, she faced challenges of really multitasking on a level that few of us men can really imagine, and certainly not totally understand. After my father's passing, or was assassinated in 1968, I sort of remember he was killed. I was 10 years old on April 4th of 1968. And on April 8th, he was to have led a demonstration in Memphis, Tennessee. And Mom chose to take the three older ones of us, my older sister, who is now deceased, my younger brother and I. My younger sister did not accompany us on that trip. And she led that demonstration, and then on April 9th, we returned, April 8th actually, the same day, we returned back to Atlanta that evening, and the next day he was eulogized. And I thought about that in this way, because at that time, no one had been captured for my father's killing. And it was a very volatile time in the United States of America. In fact, throughout those days, there were unfortunately violent kinds of activities taking place all over the country. In fact, there were over 100 cities that went up in flames during that period when he was killed. That's how much frustration. He would not have wanted that to happen, but that was the frustration and anxiety that people were experiencing in the United States at that time. And so they felt they had no other way, and so they ended up engaging in rioting. But the fact that Mom went and led that demonstration and many other things were very interesting to me, particularly as I've grown older and began to evaluate. My mother had to assume 100% of the responsibility of raising the four of us, very energetic young people. Now, that alone would certainly be a daunting prospect, but she also had to become the primary breadwinner and continue fulfilling her obligations to the modern civil rights movement, my father's church, Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, and do what she could to help carry his legacy forward into an uncertain future. And so in 1968, she also worked with a team just a little after Dad was killed to create a permanent memorial, a living memorial, as she called it, the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, based in Atlanta. All of the grace and elegance the public saw in Coretta Scott King as she carried my father's message of nonviolence around the world. Now, let me just say, she certainly put an incredible amount of hard work in, long hours and constant struggle to make all of these things happen. So there was never any doubt in my mind that women can achieve as much or more than men, because I saw it with my own eyes day after day, up close and personal. But I also saw that women face enormous obstacles as a result of institutionalized sexism and sexist attitudes. And the challenge is even more difficult for women of color. I watched with growing interest as my mother joined with the feminists of her generation to break down the barriers in the battle after battle, never giving up hope or backing down from their commitment to achieve full equality. A struggle which still continues in every nation. And through all of this, the YWCAs of great cities all over the world, in more than 120 countries, have been a major source of support for women in their quest for equality, opportunity, and personal fulfillment. I know my mother very much appreciated the invaluable leadership of the YWCAs because she said so many times. Now, my mother did not live to see the birth of her grandchild. My wife and I, Andrea, have a 7-year-old daughter. And we named her in honor of my late sister, Yolanda Denise King, but our daughter's name is Yolanda Renee King. Yolanda Renee, as I said, is 7 years old, and she does an excellent job of keeping me committed to the uplift of girls and women. And I can report to you that she's already showing the feminist spirit, determination, and commitment to social justice, to the social justice of her grandmothers and aunts. Now, in keeping with your Why Whisper theme for this gala, I was tremendously gratified last year when the Nobel Peace Prize was presented to a young lady from Pakistan that we all know of, Malala. Receiving that Nobel Peace Prize with another person on the 50th anniversary of my father's acceptance of that award. Certainly, in my view, Malala is one of the most inspirational of all of the Nobel Peace Prize recipients. And the astounding wisdom and courage of her young years is extremely relevant to the struggles we face today. It's hard to imagine a better role model for the young women coming of age in the predominantly Muslim countries, despite the horrific violence she has experienced and ongoing threats Malala receives. She continues to provide an undaunted voice for education and empowerment of girls and women, as well as a voice for compassion and service to lift up the poor and oppressed of all nations. As citizens of Canada who share cultural bonds with France, and simply compassionate human beings, we are certainly all saddened by the most recent outbreak of terrorism in Paris, France last Friday, which killed 129 innocent people and wounded hundreds more. This horrific act provides yet another reminder to us all that we face a worldwide epidemic of extremism that can erupt in massive deadly violence anytime and really anywhere. No one can feel safe in a world that is increasingly saturated in hatred, bigotry, and easy access to deadly automatic weapons and explosives. Certainly, I hear many people condemning religious extremism these days, and they certainly have a point. None of us can be so secure in our own religious convictions that we can rightly disparage the believers of others. More importantly, however, we must become more vigilant about speaking out against violence wherever and whenever it emerges. This is especially true when someone justifies killing or injuring another person by saying they are serving God. It's encouraging that people are speaking out against the terrorist massacres in Paris, across social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other outlets. We see the French flag everywhere on the internet in a wonderful display of solidarity with the people of France who have experienced so much terrorist violence. But I also wish there was an equally broad display of solidarity with the people of Kenya. For back in early April of this year, when 147 innocent Christian students were massacred at Garissa University in northeast Kenya by an extremist, these innocent young people were doing their best to get a good education so that they could help lead their nation and Africa to a new era of hope and opportunity. And their lives were cut short by hatred, bigotry, and violence. I stand in solidarity with the people of Paris in their struggle against terrorism. And I get that Paris clearly is one of the greatest cities on earth. That helps explain the huge outpouring of sympathy and solidarity. But I also want everyone to care and get it that African lives matter too. Let all such atrocities in Kenya's Garissa University, in Paris, in Beirut, wherever atrocities occur around terrorism in the world, good people of goodwill should come together and take strong action against violence and militarism. And let us remember that the governments of both the United States and Canada have not yet rectified the historic and continuing injustices inflicted on the indigenous peoples of North America. However, I'm encouraged that Prime Minister Trudeau is taking steps in the right direction and hope to see more progress in the United States. It's commendable also that Canada is following through on its commitment to provide a safe haven for Syrian refugees. Unfortunately, however, in the U.S., some state governors are now trying to deny refugees residency. In fact, as you may know, the United States Congress today passed a bill, not sure where it's going to go, rejecting funding and a couple of other things. But I think it's doubtful that not just Congress certainly has a right, but it's doubtful that the governors will have the legal right to do this. These refugees certainly have suffered great hardships, and they will be carefully screened, and it's my hope that they will find safety in the compassionate communities of North America. As we once again confront the threat of mass terrorism, it's important that we consider what the faith community can contribute to a dialogue that moves our world toward greater peace. Surely we can agree that clergy of any faith who urge followers of their faith to commit violence towards other human beings are serving evil, not God. That's got to be more of a central value of every religion. We must make sure that young people in every nation understand this principle. It is true that you can find justifications for violence in the Holy Scriptures of all faiths, but much depends on what we choose to emphasize. I believe in respecting all of the great religions of humanity. Every faith teaches some form of the golden rule, that we must treat other people the way that we want to be treated. Of course, any religion can be twisted to serve evil purposes, but it's up to the followers to insist that war and violence are unacceptable. We must also remember that the vast majority of Muslims in the U.S., Canada, and worldwide are law-abiding, peace-loving people. If we succumb to the stereotypes of Muslims as terrorists, we become part of the problem of religious bigotry. Let's not forget that there are also terrorists who called themselves Christians, as we learned during the American modern civil rights movement. For it was Christians who bombed my father's home. It was Christians who bombed my uncle's home. It was Christians who bombed churches and the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, where 4 little girls were killed. And so terrorists can really perhaps be almost anyone. I would say, however, we as a world community can and must do better. But let's resolve not to let the evil acts of a few individuals ever justify stereotyping or blaming an entire group. I would like to see a worldwide summit of religious leaders of all faiths coming together to condemn violence committed in the name of God and affirming the mandates for nonviolence in their respective scriptures. I believe we could get a strong global movement for such a cause, especially now. We have simply got to recognize that our different faiths can be a force for peace instead of conflict. There are plenty of international documents that affirm religious freedom, including the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. But I think we need to globally reaffirm the values of religious tolerance and the right of religious freedom in a big way. And we must back it up with global education programs and media campaigns. Too many young people are being recruited by various hate groups worldwide. And it's time to present them with a better way, the way of freedom, respect, and tolerance for people who have different beliefs, religions, and political viewpoints. There should be a global curriculum to educate people in all languages about the benefits of diversity as a social value. As always, ignorance is the most dangerous social pathology, and education is the only real cure. It is possible to inoculate young people against the toxic virus of hatred and violence. But for that to happen, we must commit some educational resources to it. Decent people everywhere are angry at the perpetrators of the killings in Paris, but save some anger for the global arms trade that enables terrorism. We've got to do more, much more, to stop the out-of-control trade of deadly weapons, especially in the United States. We must also acknowledge the mistakes of the past in order to secure a more peaceful and humane future. I believe that the ill-considered invasion and occupation of Iraq by the Bush administration has helped to recruit thousands of young people to become future terrorists. This disastrous response to the 9/11 attack by terrorists, none of whom were Iraqi, was a horrible decision with terrible consequences in both loss of human life and a global economic meltdown. We're still paying for it and will be doing so for a very long time. But that shouldn't prevent peace-loving people in the U.S. and Canada from pursuing creative initiatives that promote peace in the Middle East. One of the most important things we in the U.S. and Canada and all of the developed industrialized countries can do is invest in the empowerment of women in Arab nations. Our governments and corporate sectors should more generously support women's rights movements in those nations, as well as invest in their education. This should be a strong principle of our foreign policy, as well as our individual charitable contributions. Regarding the empowerment of women, I was absolutely elated to learn that your new Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has kept his promise to appoint women to fill half of Canada's cabinet. What a remarkable historic achievement. I believe there are only, yes, that deserves. I believe there are only 2 or 3 other nations, including Norway and Rwanda, which have achieved something resembling gender parity in government. My great hope, I'm going to say this one more time, my great hope is that Mr. Trudeau's visionary leadership will inspire the next president of the United States to emulate his example. But it's up to all of us as citizens of the world's great democracies to keep the pressure on for the continuing empowerment of women. Even the best leaders can falter without adequate citizen support for their progressive efforts. We're now seeing more Latinos, women, and openly gay and lesbian people, as well as people of color, being elected to offices across the U.S. and Canada. None of these constituencies have yet achieved political parity in terms of their representation in federal, state, provincial, and local legislative institutions. But the doors of opportunity are opening a little wider every day, thanks to nonviolent protest movements. Let us not rest until all of our political institutions in North America reflect the demographic realities of our countries. When that is achieved, an exciting new era of social and economic progress for all can begin in earnest. We must do a better job of identifying, recruiting, and training women candidates for office in our local, provincial, state, and national legislatures. If we really want to have governments that strive for peace and prosperity for all of our citizens, then we must work for greater diversity until our political institutions look like our countries. That will mean more women, more people of color, more religious diversity, more LGBT office holders, and more working class people of all races serving as our elected representatives. When we have met this challenge, I believe we will begin to see more effective governments that serve the people. Regarding the many incidents of police community violence that we've experienced in the U.S. in recent years, I've been often asked the question and to comment on what my father would have said about these incidents of police violence toward people of color. Now, of course, nobody really exactly knows what his position would be or could say exactly, but he struggled with police violence in his own times, and I doubt he would have been surprised that more than half a century later, it is still a major problem. For he was himself frequently harassed by law enforcement and often faced trumped-up charges and draconian sentences. He well understood that African Americans experienced a double standard in law enforcement and was committed to doing what he could to secure equal justice. I have no doubt also that he would have strongly condemned the brutal murders of 2 policemen in New York City as equally tragic. That's not to say that white people don't experience abusive law enforcement. They do, especially poor whites. And there are plenty of cases documenting that reality. But arrest rates and sentencing disparities also prove beyond any reasonable doubt that African American citizens in the U.S. still experience discrimination in law enforcement. And there have been credible studies which prove that people of color are far more likely to experience violence at the hands of police. So it's not just a case of a few well-publicized incidents. I consider it a highly positive development that the Black Lives Matter movement is increasing its involvement in politics. They've started a Black Lives Matter political action committee based in St. Louis to raise funds for voter education in campaigns for judgeship, district attorney, and other law enforcement-related elective offices. In New York, Black Lives Matter activists have also started a super political action committee to impact a broad array of political races. Black Lives Matter has been a good thing because it has helped refocus so much attention on racism in law enforcement in the U.S. And it has helped to move progressive candidates in the direction of addressing the problem. When Black Lives Matter started increasing voter turnout for progressive candidates who will work for the needed reforms, it will no longer be just a good thing. It actually will be a great thing. So how should a great democracy deal with the problem of racism in law enforcement? One response is to improve police education and training programs for all law enforcement personnel, from rookie beat patrolmen to judges. All should get some training in race relations and nonviolent alternatives in law enforcement. There should also be more programs to bring police and at-risk youth in communities together so they can get to know each other and have a continuing dialogue. That dialogue can help prevent violence, I believe. As my father once said, we have to be together before we can learn to live together. I would also like to see more citizen police community review boards in every city. Some cities and towns that have established citizen review boards have experienced impressive improvement in their police community relations. Such boards can help by alerting law enforcement to community perspectives on how police are perceived. We need more citizen-driven programs in general to build bridges of greater understanding, cooperation, and goodwill between people of different races, cultures, and even nations. Government can support such programs, but citizens of all nations have to take the initiative. The people of the U.S., Canada, and the developed nations have often responded to global humanitarian crisis with great generosity and compassion. This doesn't mean there's no room for improvement, however. We can and we should expand our generosity to help people in crisis everywhere. And in so doing, we can set an irresistible example of moral strength, which will help us set the stage for peace more than all of our marching boots and bombs put together, expanding our commitment to help the poor and suffering people beyond our political boundaries is not only worthwhile on humanitarian grounds, it is good politics and good business. As our world becomes increasingly small and interdependent, as a result of the global communications revolution, it becomes more difficult to define ourselves as a member of a single community. The internet alone has rendered political boundaries less consequential, and that's a very good thing. Whatever excuses we've had for ignorance of the hardships and struggles of people in distant lands have been all but obliterated by the internet and cell phones. For those who have easy access to cell phones and computers, ignorance is increasingly a choice. When a humanitarian catastrophe occurs anywhere in the world, we are made aware of it almost instantly. Within a few hours, we're able to text contributions to the Red Cross or to the YWCA because of apps and technology. Part of the challenge we face today is making sure that people in developing nations have access to all of the tools of modern communications. Knowledge is power, but only when broadly shared in this regard. I certainly salute Bill Gates and other business leaders who have made a generous effort to share modern communication technology with underserved communities and developing nations. But some of the most daunting challenges we face in strengthening our prospects for peace worldwide is not mastering communications technology. It is that our moral progress is lagging far behind it. My father recognized this problem and wrote about it in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. And in that book, he said, we must work passionately and indefatigably to bridge the gulf between our scientific progress and our moral progress. One of the great problems of mankind is that we suffer from a poverty of the spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. When scientific power outruns moral power, we end up with guided missiles and misguided men. One of the beautiful things about humanitarian service is it doesn't have to wait for the slow grinding wheels of justice to help balance the scales. My dad once said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but bends towards justice. I would add that he also understood that human beings could accelerate the bending of that arc through service to those who have been the victims of injustice. Everyone can find meaning and purpose in serving those who need some help. Every day that you help someone is a good day. Every good deed has positive echoes and adds a little more hope to the world. And on those rare days when something you did made a lasting difference for the better in the life of somebody who was in trouble, well, that's a great day. Each and every one of us should strive to create the kind of life that has many great days. And yet we must acknowledge that service alone cannot address all of the pressing needs of our disadvantaged fellow citizens. It's a beautiful thing to be generous with your time and make significant donations to worthy causes, but it's equally important that we do our civic duty with respect to social change in the political process. If we truly want to create the beloved community of Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, all of us must become outspoken champions, not only of tolerance and the live and let live philosophy. We must also serve our communities as champions of brotherhood and sisterhood, the kind that transcends race, religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, or any other demographic categories. Whenever we go in our lives and whatever we do, we should make a point of holding up the values of dignity, respect, and goodwill for all people, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, physical or mental disability. We should always speak out against bigotry whenever it emerges. Our voice, our deeds, and indeed our lives should affirm the sisterhood, brotherhood, and unity of all people. When we make this simple commitment, our lives will grow in meaning, purpose, and nobility. God has provided our world with an abundance of everything we need to create the beloved community of my Father's dream. Our challenge and our obligation today is to nurture and share the divine gifts with all of the world's peoples across man-made political boundaries. We must create a world in which our religious and ethnic differences are respected and valued as vital components of a beautiful global mosaic, a mosaic that reveals the best in us all, black and white, red and brown and yellow, Christian and Jew, Muslim, Buddhist and Hindu, East and West. The road we must travel to get to the promised land is a different road. It's a road paved with respect for diversity and undergirded with love, reinforced with patience, charted by the principles and practices of nonviolence and leading to world peace. And as we strive to build new bridges over the chasms and boundaries to divide the human family, let us dare to dream of a peace that humanity has never known. Let us dream of a new Jerusalem where Muslims and Jews break bread together at the table of brotherhood and sisterhood, and a new Belfast where Catholic and Protestant children learn how to love and trust each other as they grow together in a community of caring. Let us dream of a new day in the Americas when the native peoples of this hemisphere are no longer denied their human rights. Let us dare to dream of vibrant democracies where economic opportunities can flourish throughout Africa and across the Middle East. Let us dare to dream of a world where no child of any race or nation goes to bed hungry at night. A world where every family has decent shelter, employment for their breadwinners, educational opportunities for its young people. Let us dare to dream about a new era when the armaments of annihilation are replaced with the plowshares of renewal. These are the challenges we must meet if we truly want to create the beloved community in which peoples of all nations can share in the fruits of peace and prosperity. If we can share this vision, then we can begin to nurture it and bring it into reality. In meeting this challenge, we will light the way forward to the end of humanity's long nightmare of poverty, racism, militarism, and violence, and the dawning of a luminous new era of hope and healing. Let me close with these words. When I was a child, my mother took me to her undergraduate school in the United States called Antioch College. And on that college campus was a statue of the educator Horace Mann. And under that statue was an inscription that I take with me every day, and it made an indelible impact upon my life. What that inscription said was, "Be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity." And as I thought about that, I said, my goodness, that is a set of powerful words. Be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity. Well, some of us own corporations, so that may not be as challenging. But I took it and broke it down, and I said, you can win a victory in your neighborhood. You can win a victory in your school. You can win a victory in the places that you may worship. Some of us will win victories in our cities. Some will win victories in our provinces. Some will win victories in our countries, and some may even win victories in our world. What those words fundamentally mean are, be ashamed to die until you've done a little something to make the world in which we all must live a little better than it was when you arrived. Thank you very much, and may God bless you and the YWCA of Calgary.